And it looks like I'm live. Cool. Um, Good win for the Jazz. They came off two rough losses, both games that they could have won, but that's how it happens. And they had another tough game, back end of a back-to-back against the Blazers. Came back and won. It was really close in the first half, but the Jazz had a killer third quarter. They beat the Blazers 40-19 third quarter, and then from there they just ran the game. Every other quarter was really close. Um, Yeah, so it's really the third quarter that the Jazz really separated themselves. And I haven't had much of a chance to really dig into the stats yet because I was excited. I wanted to get live real fast. So I guess you'll get my raw reaction to the stats. That being said, don't forget to put your comments in the live chat. That's what makes this fun. So just keep putting stuff there and I'll run with it. I'll run with what you give me. So I'll dig into the team stats, and then I'll go over to the box score real quick to just go over the highlights there, and then I'll get to any comments that are in the live chat. So the box score, so the Blazers, the reason why they're a tough team, they're not a great defensive team. They are supposed to be incredible on offense, and look at the pieces that they have. Let me pull up the roster so I don't forget anyone. But obviously, Damian Lillard, um, the CJ McCollum, Carmelo Anthony, Robert Covington, Norman Powell. Nurkic played tonight. He's not like an offensive force. He's really their defensive anchor. But they have some great offensive pieces. The great thing with the Jazz, though, is they shut them down at least as far as shooting percentage goes. I'll take a look at the rebounds because that was really the rough thing for the Jazz. But shooting percentage, they kept the Blazers underneath 40% from the field, which is awesome. The Jazz were okay from the field, 45%. I like to see better, but I'm not angry at that. And interesting thing is the Blazers actually made one more three than the Jazz. Both teams were kind of slow from the three. So that's a little scary. I kind of talked about that a little bit last night on the stream where look at the number of players on the Jazz who are kind of in a shooting slump. And Sawyer just brought this up in the live chat. That recently, Clarkson hasn't been shooting great. And then Joe Ingles, I don't know if he's on a slump, but he just hasn't been shooting a ton the past couple of games. So if that continues, that's rough because that's a huge part of the Jazz of their offense. But luckily for the Jazz tonight, they were good from the getting shots, good shots inside, which typically they don't really focus on that, but I think they focus on that a little more tonight, even though they shot 42 threes, so maybe they didn't. Maybe the threes just weren't falling. And they did get a good amount of free throws, so that's really what helped them. It was not the three-point shooting for them tonight. Rebounds, they out-rebounded the Blazers, and they didn't let too many offensive boards like they did against the Suns. Only 9 offensive boards allowed for the Jazz, so the Blazers only came away with 9. Other than that, not seeing anything terribly exciting in the team stats. It is those shooting stats were the interesting ones though. The Blazers shot bad and the Jazz shot a little bit better. And like Sawyer pointed out, the Jazz are kind of in a shooting slump from 3, so I don't know what's going on there, but it needs to fix itself. Like the Jazz can still win games, but it's going to be hard to make a deep playoff run if the 3-pointers aren't falling, because that's really what makes a good team to a great team. And like the phrase goes, live and die by the 3. So if the shots aren't falling, then the Jazz are going to die by the 3, which is not a good sign. I feel like it hasn't been a ton of games like this, so hopefully this isn't something that continues and the Jazz kind of curb real quick, but that's what we're dealing with right now. And like I said, yeah, no one on the team really shot good. The only Nurkic and Little were the only people, and they didn't. Both of them scored 10 or less. No one really went off. The Jazz kept Lillard tame with 23 points, which is great. Um, yeah, so I'm going to pin this win for the Jazz on the defense, even though they did have a really good third quarter. And Mitchell he kept them alive offensively, um, with 37 points, uh, and shooting great, honestly, except for from three. He was only 1 for 8 from three, 14 for 25 uh, from the field. And then Gobert had a nice game. I think the team, from what I saw, eye test wise, like obviously they still shot a lot of threes. Eye test wise, I feel like the team was trying to come out and pass the ball a little bit more on offense, which gave them more good shots for Gobert. And Gobert was a monster on the boards, so he kind of made some of his own buckets there. Um, so I feel like this game is actually really similar to the game against the Suns last night, except for the Jazz just rebounded and the Jazz played good enough defense to keep the Blazers from hitting threes, which is great that they improved on some things and got the win against another good team, but there's still some major issues there that the Jazz are going to have to work through. Um, but yeah, I like probably a slump. Um, cool. I'll go to the chat. It looks like it's a little dead. Maybe it's just a Thursday night, and everyone who hopped on yesterday is tired from the kind of late stream last night as well. Both two 8 o'clock games right in a row. But so asking about my birthday yesterday. So it was my birthday. If you missed that, if you're watching this video and didn't miss the end, that'd be great. Sorry, asked how my birthday was. It was fine. It was a birthday. I didn't do for school. I've been really busy with homework and normal work, so I'm I'll probably have a bigger celebration later. When I'm not so bogged down with work. But to get back to basketball, I think Sorry left a really interesting comment that I want to spend time with, and anyone who's live now, feel comment on this. If you're watching this video after it's posted and the live part's done, post in the comments. And so Sawyer says that he actually thinks Mitchell is like the MVP for the league. Um, and you worded it, Mitchell is a MVP. I'm hoping I'm interpreting it right, that you think he should win the MVP this year. And like I think it's like because of some injuries, it's looking a lot more possible. I feel like right now Jokic is probably the favorite, but then again the Nuggets aren't like playing crazy good. So if the Jazz can keep playing crazy good and Mitchell is still putting up these 30-point plus game nights, because right now he's averaging 25, which is NBA numbers. He just needs to pad the other stats and keep that up. So I think if this play continues, Mitchell might not win the MVP, but he'll definitely get votes. Um, Jokic is playing great. I think unless Mavs do something crazy and really like get home court advantage in the playoffs, which is really unlikely at this point, I can't see Luka really making a real run at it. LeBron has been injured. Anthony Davis has been injured. Joel Embiid has been injured. So it's really opening up for some of these small market teams to have players like a Jokic or like a Mitchell to come in. If the Blazers were playing better, I think right now they're the 6th in the West. I think they're a spot ahead of the Mavs. If the Blazers were playing a little bit better, then I think Lillard should be in that conversation. But the MVP conversation is definitely really interesting this year. Yeah, I'm excited to see how that plays out because there's no clear front runner as far as I can tell. Last I saw, like the Vegas odds favorite was Jokic, but I think that data is a week old, and with how the NBA has been this season, it's probably changing every couple of days now. Sorry says I don't think James Harden deserves the MVP this year. I think James Harden is playing excellently. It's not like an MVP Harden season though, and I don't think he'll get it. I don't think, because there's a lot of, honestly, like the annoying thing with MVP is there's a lot of players out there who play good enough to get it, but it's all about the story. And I don't know. Maybe they'll just favor the super team Nets with the first year coach being Steve Nash, and he's a 2-time MVP too. I don't think that's the story that people that the media is going to want to tell, and they're really the decision makers for the MVP. So I think Mitchell would make a better story. So I agree with you. Well, I agree with you partially. I agree with you mostly. I would say I don't think James Harden is really having an MVP year. I think he's having an excellent year. I don't think he's getting the MVP though. Um, yeah, it's going to be an interesting conversation, interesting race to follow. Um, Defensive Player of the Year is another that one's going to be interesting. I really hope Gobert gets it. I haven't looked at the odds or anything, so that's normally not something I follow very closely until the end of the season. And then Sixth Man of the Year, that's going to be a little bit more of an interesting race because Clarkson was a clear front runner, but he hasn't been playing great recently. So if he keeps up this play, he might not really get a chance. The Yeah. Another cool thing, I forgot to mention this when I was going over the box score, is the Jazz played a really deep rotation tonight, and Ilyasova got, I think uh, are these his first points with the Jazz? He hit a three tonight, and I don't remember him scoring before unless I missed something. So I might have missed something. I don't always follow the games that I don't do a live stream. Excuse me, that I don't do a live stream. But yeah, they played. What is this? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 plus 5. They played 14. I think that's the deepest rotation you can play, right? Or can you play 15? And I think Clarkson was out because I'm not seeing him. So I did talk about last night that I think the Jazz should start playing deeper rotations, especially in back-to-backs. And luckily, I don't think they were planning to coming into this game, but they were just ahead by enough in the fourth quarter because they had a killer third quarter that they could play that deep rotation in the garbage minutes. So cool to see. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I wanted to cover. The chat's not really live enough for me to ask this question. I'll ask it anyway. If you want to leave your response, you can. If not, go ahead and leave it in the comments, and we can kind of keep the conversation going on in the comments. But I was thinking, because it takes some time to set up the stream, and just yeah, and so while I was waiting for it to set up, I was thinking like this is kind of a fun question, not a realistic question, but if you could snap your fingers, no worries about cap, no worries about anything, and just have one current player in the NBA be on the Jazz, which player do you think would be the most beneficial for the Jazz? Um, if you want to answer that, I'll give you some time to answer it before I go over it because Will just left a comment, so I'll address that. And if you want to name the player that you want, that you wish was on the Jazz right now, don't worry about cap. We're not trading anything. It's just they appear on the roster. Not we lose nothing, which isn't possible because I think we have a full roster. But this is a hypothetical. I'll leave the player that you think in the chat. But Will said, "I know we won, but we got to get back to our hot shooting." I agree. I feel like, well, I don't know if you're here for this section, but I kind of talked about how this game it felt a lot like the Suns game last night. It's just the Jazz, the two things that were different were the Jazz didn't allow as many offensive rebounds, and the Jazz overall defense held the Blazers to under 40% from the field. But everything else, the Jazz really weren't shooting well. I guess another difference is the Jazz shot well from the free throw line tonight, at least better than they did last night. So that's yeah, it's rough. They need to get better at shooting. There's too many players that just aren't confident. Or I'm not going to say they're not confident because they might be, just the shots aren't falling. So something needs to be fixed. It's not just an individual player at this point. It's a good chunk of the team. So I wonder if that's a team issue or just bad luck that a lot of players are facing this right now. The good news is we still have a chunk of time before the playoffs. And And so that's enough time for them to fix it. And if they don't, then we probably won't get a deep playoff run if we're shooting like this. Um, but yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on things. It's like a little bleak even with the win against a good team, but that's the truth of it. Like the Jazz defense is good enough to carry them on bad shooting nights in the regular season, but it's not good enough to carry them through bad shooting nights for an entire series in the playoffs. Um, and then Will responded to my question of which player um, would be the best on the Jazz, and he's trying to go more semi real. So he says Jeremy Grant. As far as a more realistic role, that's like a good plug in player that would fit really well. I can't argue that. Um, when you're trying to go semi realistic, obviously, if you're trying to go like best player ever or best player in the league, that'd be rough. Um, Sawyer says Lillard or Giannis. I love Giannis. I don't think he'd fit in with what the Jazz are doing because he's not like he can hit threes, but he's not really a shooter. And then what are you going to do with Gobert on the floor? Or like I think that makes it more complicated. Oh, and for clarification, sorry, it's like just you snap your fingers, the players on the roster. You don't have to worry about a trade or cutting anyone. Like this is just a completely hypothetical, just for fun. I think Lillard's a fun one because then you get that 1-2 punch with Lillard and Mitchell. I think the downside to Lillard is you don't get as much as you can out of Conley if Lillard's there, which obviously isn't that big of a deal because you have Damian Lillard. And the other downside with Lillard is I would say um, he would take the ball away from Mitchell, which honestly any superstar will. I think Lillard would do so more because he's a very ball dominant player, and I'm sure he could change that if he wanted to, but he is a point guard, so I don't know what you'd want him to do otherwise. Um, Sorry says I would, and then Sorry brings up Kawhi Leonard. Um, And then Will Jensen says if best player, best fit, he'd say either LeBron, Kawhi, or KD. Um, I like LeBron. Like LeBron's going to fit anywhere. I don't. I feel like there's other pieces out there. I like Kawhi a lot because he adds that defense, adds the shooting, and Kawhi Leonard is happy playing off ball, but he just brings in another closer to the team if that happened. And I think KD would be a perfect fit. Um, as far as playing on the court, I don't think he'd be the perfect fit in the locker room. And this is just me digging a little deeper into it. But I love Kevin Durant on the court match. Um, when I was thinking about it, honestly, Lillard came up for like Lillard was an option I thought of first. That's why I kind of had those options. Um, I considered someone like Brandon Ingram or Jason Tatum because I think either of them would be awesome on the Jazz, but I was thinking like that's probably not thinking big enough. Neither of them have proved themselves. And if Jason Tatum has been surrounded by a ton of talent his whole career, and if he hasn't been able to get a championship with that Celtics team, then like, who's to say that throwing him on the Jazz is going to like make that any better? Nothing against Jason Tatum. I think he's an awesome player, but honestly, I didn't think about KD, so that's an interesting one. I think, and this might be, maybe you guys will think I'm not like dreaming big enough with this pick, but I think Klay Thompson would be awesome. He'd in this team he'd play more of the like a small forward kind of role instead of a shooting guard like he does on Warriors, and obviously he's injured. So, and this is a hypothetical, so I can say he's not injured at this point. But I think that'd be an awesome fit because he brings great perimeter defense, assuming he comes back healthy, which I'm hoping he does. Obviously an incredible shooter, and he's an off-ball scorer, so he wouldn't take touches away from, at least he wouldn't take the ball away from Conley or Donovan Mitchell, but he's just another crazy person to guard. And I like Klay because I think he's the perfect second star. He gives you exactly what you need for a second star without taking anything away from the primary star, which I think he's like. I think like yeah, it's like the same thing as like Scottie Pippen. Scottie Pippen when Michael Jordan was off the team, he was still an excellent player, one of the best in the league. But he like his perfect fit was being that second star next to Jordan, and so I think it's kind of like Clay, but even more so because Scottie Pippen needed the ball in his hand sometimes too. You guys had some comments while I went off on that rant, so I'll catch up on those. Um, Sir says that like I would not like LeBron because he would take the ball more. Um, I don't know, like he definitely would. I think other players would take it a lot more than LeBron, and I think LeBron's mindset is I think he's happy to not have the ball in his hands if he feels like he doesn't need it. Um, like when he was with Kyrie Irving, at certain points in certain games when he knew Kyrie could take care of business, LeBron didn't want the ball in his hands. So I do agree that overall it would take the ball away from Mitchell more. Sawyer suggested Jamal Murray. That would be awesome. I think that would be more fun to watch than like a Lillard Mitchell duo, but like a Murray Mitchell duo, that would be really exciting. Um, yeah, and then Sawyer's um, catching everyone up that we're talking about like you just snap your fingers, don't have to worry about trading, don't have to worry about cap, don't have to worry about cutting anyone. Just what player would you wish could just be on the Jazz right now, um, to give them the best chances at winning a championship, obviously. So, um, yeah. So if you have any thoughts on that, that'd be cool. But here's some more comments. I'm still quite afraid of and good win despite the poor 3-point shooting. Yeah. So, like my take on this is and I went over this before, but I'll review just kind of what my take is on this. It's basically the Jazz. They have a ton of players that are in a shooting slump. Royce O'Neal isn't shooting good. Bojan's not shooting good. Um, Clarkson's not shooting good. Ingles just really isn't shooting that much, and Conley's kind of been, eh. So like with that, I feel like because the Jazz, their offense is so centered around that 3-point shot that if they keep shooting like this, I honestly and this is kind of depressing to think about, but I honestly wouldn't be shocked if the Jazz lose in the first round because their offense is so based around hitting those threes. And obviously, their defense is amazing. So their defense can probably carry them through a series with a lesser team. But in the Western Conference, it's deep enough that how it might play out, if they might play a tough team in that first round, and if they're not hitting shots, they might not be able to get out of a series. So, in order for the Jazz to really have playoff success, they need to be hitting threes. Because if you think about this Jazz team, obviously they're a lot better than the Jazz team that we saw 2 years ago. But if you take that 3-point shooting away, I like I think they're pretty much the same as that Jazz team 2 years ago. Great defense, okay offense when it's on, but really it's all leaning on Mitchell. And so we need to get away from needing Mitchell to score 35 plus points in order to win games. Obviously, I love it when he scores 35 points, but if he could score 35 and have Bojan add in, um, Bojan shot fine from three, but awful from the field. But just having players shoot decent percentages, and as that happens, Mitchell's not going to take as many shots because he'll be a lot more comfortable. Like instead of taking a tough contested layup, he'll be a lot more comfortable kicking it out to a 3-point shooter, and that's what's really going to make the Jazz offense a lot scarier. Story Parker says this is off topic, but does anyone else not like Trae Young anymore? Um, I don't know. I'm kind of on him. He's fun to watch, but he's not my favorite player in the world. I'll give him a few more years to really, for me to really have a actual decision on him. So is there any specific reason why you're not liking Trey Young? Um, but like get back to the Jazz conversation while you answer that, Sawyer. Um, Carter says it's sad, but it's true. That's the reality. I'm guessing that's about the Jazz might like lose in the first round if they don't get that 3-point shot back. Will Jensen says, I don't know. I don't really like Trey. He just does dumb pump fake jump into the defender thing. Yeah, that's kind of that's the game he kind of grew up like his when he was really developing his game in high school and college. He was watching James Harden and Steph Curry. Um, and Sawyer says, I don't want to be that guy, but we won't make it past the second round because everyone is trying to break down their strategy. I honestly, I don't think their strategy is anything like brand new. Um, it's like, and I'm sure you've all heard the quote by Steve Kerr where he says that this Jazz team reminds him of the Warriors that first year that they won. Version of that Warriors offense. There's not quite as much off-ball movement, but and so it is a little different. I don't think it's that coaches and players haven't figured out how to break it. I think it's that um, it's just if you have so many shooters, there's only so much you can do. And I don't know if there's like one defensive system that can break this offense when people are hitting their shots. Um, and maybe it's just they figured out how to get people out of the rhythm. And maybe it's like they're not breaking the system; they're just learning how to break the players down. Which maybe that's why we're all in a shooting slump. Which, if that's the case, then that's rough, and the Jazz really need to rework something before playoffs, or else this isn't going to work. I do think, and it's like looking more like that. I understand where you're coming from, Sawyer, but I do think that if they can get back shooting, like if they don't make it to the Western Conference Finals, they'll at least like push whoever they play in the second round to a game 7. But I think that if they're shooting like they used to be, then um, they can go as far as they let themselves go in the playoffs. Really, Carter says that I hope the Jazz don't go the way of the last seasons of the Pittsburgh Steelers. That should not be a tongue twister, but it was for me. Honestly, so I'm a Cowboys fan, and since the football, I enjoy it. But it's like one of those sports where I follow it when my team's doing good to really dig deep into that comparison. But I know what's his name, the quarterback Roethlisberger was hurt one season, and they were kind of and then they came back, and I think they were better, but just like not great this year, if I remember correctly. And then Will Jensen says, I think our biggest need is a more athletic defender. I like Royce, but he's not athletic enough to stick with guards. Yeah, a minivan can only take you so far, right? But yeah, I think that would make sense. I think like that's why, and obviously like it's impossible to get Klay Thompson in reality, but that's why I probably went with like a Klay Thompson. If it wasn't Klay Thompson, then I'd probably go for someone like Kawhi, because like he's not neither of them are super athletic, but I think they're more athletic and they're good enough at defense that they like they're that like because they're not super athletic, they make up for that. More realistic options though, I don't know. Obviously, like the Jazz aren't getting any other help this season. I can't see anything like that happening, but yeah, next season, I'm sure that they'll be looking to make like keep the core together, but make a couple changes to help that out. And there's a lot of like I feel like good wing defenders that can't shoot super well. I feel like you can get those kind of players for pretty cheap. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Jazz found someone like that made reference, they started 11-0 and lost in the wild card. Yeah, that'd be rough. I really hope that doesn't happen to the Jazz. I think they have enough talent to make that not happen. But then again, if they're playing like they have the past few games, that might be what happens. Will says a random player I was looking at is Michael Bridges. He's athletic and he's a good shooter, but wouldn't be able to get him. Yeah, that's the tough part with like, unless the Jazz want to trade someone like Bojan, it's going to be because shooting is at such a premium, and then if with shooting combined with defense, those players are tough to get. Teams like to hold on to those players. But then if you can find a player that is like not awful at 3-point shooting, but a defender, teams undervalue just defensive players. And so if the Jazz feel confident that there's a young player who can play defense and with a little work, they can get his 3-point shot to like, I don't know, or like 34, 35% from three, and that could be really valuable for the Jazz. And so you might want to look at underrated players who really haven't done much. I forget their names. I think they're still on the Hornets though. I don't know if they're twins or if they're just brothers, but they're on the Hornets. I think Caleb and Cody are their first names. I'm forgetting their last name, but they're like from shooting, but they're really like athletic and good defenders. So I would love to see the Jazz pick up a player like that. So yeah, the Jazz got the win. Rough playing recently. I'm hoping it's just a low stretch, and as we get closer and closer to the preseason, that we start seeing, or postseason, sorry, that we start seeing more playoff like caliber basketball. The Jazz do have 2 games in a row against the Lakers coming up, so I'm excited to see how that goes, and that might. I haven't followed the injuries honestly, so if the Lakers are at least mostly healthy at that point, I know there's been some injury issues, so it might not be. I know there's still some time, so that might work. But if the Lakers are healthy, that could really help us figure out where the Jazz are as a team. Yeah, Caleb and Cody Martin. Yeah, I know the Hornets like them. I bet we could get I forget which one. Like, I bet we could get the lower valued one. We might have to throw in a pick or something, but I would like, or I'm sure there's other players like them in the NBA, and they just kind of are the more popular ones. But with that being said, I'm excited to see the next few games, and hopefully the Jazz get out of this slump. I'm going to wrap up the stream here, but thanks guys for keeping the chat fun. I think we had a cool conversation. I don't know about you, but I kind of like those hypotheticals where it's just like, if you could get any player and not worry about cap, like questions like that. I think that'd be fun. So one I'll address these last couple comments and then I'll wrap up the stream. But Carter says ESPN has the Jazz winning percentage at 800 for the remainder of the season based on strength of schedule. That doesn't surprise me. Their schedule honestly is kind of weak, and even with the Jazz playing bad, I bet they could get around that. Maybe get a little under that with them playing bad, just because of their schedule. So I bet they'll hold on to the 1 seed. It's just how are they playing when it comes to playoffs. And Will says, well, the problem is we can't trade for them anymore because of the deadline. Yeah, and at this point, it's probably impossible to get any new player on the team. The only way is through free agency, and the Jazz would have to cut someone. And I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a cutoff date around the playoffs where you just can't sign anyone else. So anyone else that the Jazz would get to help with that, we'd be looking at next season, and it wouldn't help them with this playoffs. But everyone, thanks for joining me tonight. This was fun. There weren't a ton of us, but I think we had a good conversation. I enjoyed it at least. So, yeah, have a good night. And I think the next game is Saturday night, so make sure to tune in for that stream. Thanks for joining me again.